So this review is going to be a little bit different than what I typically do because the new Apple Watch Ultra 2 Black is, well, basically the same Ultra 2 that came out last year, but now it has this new tuxedo. And when it comes to the fitness and sports performance, well, there's really no surprises here where that's basically the same as before, where it's a solid performer. So I don't necessarily want to bore you by going through all those details again where you could just watch last year's video, but I'll still definitely be covering some of those things today. I think it's actually going to be better to use this video to talk about what's actually new with the Ultra 2 Black. And yes, it is just a new color, but based on the popularity of my intro video of the Ultra 2 Black, lots of you out there really want to know all the nitty-gritty details, and I have even more to share with you about it in this video. But along with that though, I also want to talk about some of the newest additions with watchOS 11. I already made a video about some of the new features like training load as well as their new Vitals app, which I'll have that video linked down in the description below, but there's also some new stuff I wanted to talk about, like some changes with the action button, a new feature with double tap, which I actually do use, as well as their new sleep apnea tracking feature. So this video will be more focused on the style and aesthetics, since that's what really this new Ultra 2 Black is all about. So I'll be talking about how they achieved this finish, thoughts on durability, as well as even how it looks with different bands and such, because hey, style can matter. And this is actually going to be a two-part review because I want to follow up in about a month or so with a longer term look, because I think a question that a lot of you may have is how durable this new finish may be. I've only had this for about a week or so, so I can't really speak to that quite yet, so I think that does deserve a follow-up. Oh, and Apple also did announce their new Series 10 with a pretty good slate of updates all around, including new case sizes, a larger display, as well as the new capability of tracking snorkeling. And I'll have my full in-depth review of this watch that'll be coming up right after this. So when it comes to features and performance, so this is basically the exact same watch that Apple released last year. It still has a titanium case, it still has a sapphire lens, it still has that display that it can get up to a hilariously bright 3000 nits, it still has dual band GPS, and it still has a great heart rate sensor. That's all the same. The big difference, of course, is this new black colorway, and it may just be a new color, but it really does change the look and feel a lot from the natural titanium of the original Ultra and the Ultra 2. They did also bring that dark theme to the box itself, so I guess that's kind of appropriate. Anyhow, back to the watch itself. So they achieved this new black satin color with a PVD process, which stands for physical vapor deposition, where it's a chemical process where they use gas to attract carbon elements to the raw titanium. And through this process, they create a diamond-like coating with this satin black finish. And the result is kind of interesting, where this isn't a midnight black or like a jet black color, but the finish on the Ultra 2 Black is more of an extremely dark gray or like almost like a gunmetal color, and it's certainly not like glossy either like their new Series 10. This definitely has a matte finish to it where you can see that even more in direct sunlight, where some of that titanium character still will actually come out. And they also carried through this black color to the back of the watch as well, where they have this matching dark crystal back, and to take it even one step further, even these screws are black. But along with the color, this finish also has an added benefit where, since it has this extra layer of carbon over the raw titanium, it's apparently even harder and more scratch resistant than the natural titanium on the original Ultra and the Ultra 2. That's something I can't really speak of at the moment since I've only been using it for a little while, but that's something I'll definitely loop back to a little bit later on down the road. But when it comes to the actual look and feel, well, this is all personal preference, of course, but I can't help but say that I'm a gigantic fan. So this is the color I always wanted the Ultra to be, both the original Ultra as well as the Ultra 2, and we finally now have it, and quite frankly, I think it's pretty stunning. And one thing is that it's definitely a lot more subtle in my opinion, but I also like the fact that the display blends into this case a lot more than the natural titanium. So for me, it looks a little bit cleaner, but again, that's just me, and I've seen plenty of comments from folks who actually prefer the natural titanium color, which is obviously totally cool in the gang. Now, to keep that dark theme going, they also have matching bands where these have black titanium hardware to match the case, like this trail loop that I have right here, where it's all kind of blacked out versus the original black trail loop, which had that orange accent, and then even this green alpine loop here, which has the matching black hardware. And they also introduced their new titanium Milanese band. So this is that ultra premium band option for those of you out there, where they took titanium and then smashed it into this kind of weave. And I'm not necessarily a fan of fancier bands like this, but it just matched the black case so well, and I kind of digged it. And I think one reason I actually liked it so much is because of how light it was, where it just felt really light on the wrist. Now, I only had a couple hours to play around with it at the keynote event, but I think I have one on the way, so I'll have some follow-up thoughts on that band as well in my follow-up video. Oh, and by the way, even though they did kind of highlight the matching black titanium Milanese loop with the new black Ultra 2, they do also have a natural titanium version of that band for those of you who prefer the natural titanium Ultra. Oh, and for those of you out there who already have a collection of a lot of other Apple Watch bands, here's how the Ultra 2 Black black looks with some older bands with the natural titanium hardware, in case you have a bunch of those already laying around, as well as how it looks with some other bands like some Nike bands. Oh, and really quick, if you're finding the information in this video to be useful, do me a quick favor and just hit that like button down below. It's a small thing that you can do that'll help this video and the channel quite a bit, and I appreciate it. The action button and the digital dial still retain that orange accent to them, but there's actually a change to the action button on the software side of things with watchOS 11. So in addition to the short press and long hold of the action button, there's this kind of in-between action now that you can do with a medium press. So short pressing just brings up whatever you have the action button set to do, whether that's starting a workout or turning on the flashlight. But if you press and hold, a menu will actually pop up for all the things that you could actually do with the short press, and then that action will be then assigned to the action button. Now, initially, I was super excited to have this new menu pop up with all those functions, but it doesn't start the action that you choose in the menu. It merely assigns the function to the action button. And I feel like it would just be a lot more useful to actually be able to start an action using that medium press behavior with that menu versus it just being a way to assign a new action to the button. You can still enable the siren though with a longer press, but it just kind of has that in-between behavior now. So that's the hardware end of things, but now let's talk about some of the newest software features to come to the Ultra 2 via watchOS 11, and let's just get into one of the biggest announcements being sleep apnea tracking. So sleep apnea is a condition when someone occasionally stops breathing throughout the night when they sleep, which doesn't just disrupt sleep, but also can lead to other health conditions like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, as well as other cardiac issues. And it apparently affects not just millions, but like billions of people around the world. And what's kind of scary though is that around 80% of people who do have sleep apnea don't actually know that they have it. So this is yet another interesting, unique, and very useful health tracking feature for Apple to roll out, since there just aren't many wearables that can actually do such a thing. Plus this requires regulatory approval, which they do have in select regions at the moment for this feature, and I'm sure that's going to expand in the future. So you'll enable sleep apnea tracking via the Health app on your phone, where you'll go into the Browse tab on the right-hand side, go to respiratory, and then down to breathing disturbances. And then from here, you'll be able to set up the actual sleep apnea notifications by going through this short onboarding process where they'll ask you if you're 18 years or older and if you've ever been diagnosed with sleep apnea in the past, as their implementation is meant for people 18 years or older, as well as people not having previous diagnosis of sleep apnea. But once you have that set up, you'll need to sleep with your device, and then after 30 calendar days, it'll analyze your sleep data and then report back to you if it detected any potential moderate to severe sleep apnea, including when it was actually observed. And for me, I'm actually a very restless sleeper, as you may have seen from some of my sleep scores, so this is a particularly interesting feature for me to try out. And it was just released to the public as of Monday, September 16th with the release of watchOS 11, so I'll need a little bit more time with it to kind of report back to you on what I found, but I'm super curious, so definitely stay tuned. But what is really nice about the sleep apnea tracking feature is that it's not just for the Ultra 2, but also for the Series 9 as well as the Series 10. So if you do happen to have one of those watches, go ahead and update your watch to watchOS 11, and then you can enable this feature. Now, one thing that actually did change with the Ultra 2 Black though versus the original Ultra 2 when it first came out is that these do not have blood oxygen saturation tracking in the US. So that's where if you have an original Ultra or Ultra 2 that does have that feature enabled, and it's a feature that you use, that's actually something to consider with the Ultra 2 Black if you live in the United States. And then on the training side of things, so the Ultra 2 has their new effort rating and training load features that came out with watchOS 11, and I've got another video where I went into all the nitty-gritty details of how those features work, but basically for a quick rundown, they've added a way to track the intensity of each workout, which is what they call effort rating, and then you can also keep track of your training volume and training load of your workouts over time with their training load feature. And it's something that a lot of us have been asking for a long time that other companies have had for a while, like let's say Garmin. And there haven't really been any notable changes on that front since it was first announced at WWDC, but one thing I actually did notice is with effort rating, where that's basically an intensity level that gets automatically calculated for you after each cardio workout. So initially, it was almost just always giving me a moderate rating for almost all my workouts, regardless of how intense it was. But I have noticed with recent training that it seems to be classifying my harder workouts actually as harder workouts, where before it was just like, do better. It does seem to be a lot more reactive now. And then on the water sports side of things, so there's a new tides app that they rolled out with watchOS 11, where this can give tide information for shorelines all across the world with information on swells, just general weather information, as well as sunrise and sunset times for the next 7 days. Now, one feature that rolled out last year with the Series 9 as well as the Ultra 2 was their double tap feature. And this was arguably one of the most debated features on if this was actually new or not versus their accessibility features, which had some similar functions. Anyhow, putting that aside, one feature that they added to it, which I think is actually fantastic, is the ability to double tap through data screens during a workout. And as a cyclist, I think this is awesome, where I don't have to take my other hand off the handlebar to kind of scroll through. And this feature isn't enabled by default, by the way. So to enable it, just go into settings, workout, then scroll down to see the toggle for double tap through workout views. Oh, and another thing that they added is the ability to play music through the built-in speaker on the Ultra 2. Before, the speaker was just used for notifications as well as for calls, but now you can actually play music through that speaker. Now, on the actual sports and fitness performance side of things with the Ultra 2 Black, again, this is really going to be the same as last year, and it's a solid performer where GPS accuracy looks good from both the distances that it was collecting, as well as the altimeter looks good at tracking elevation gain from the activities that I've done with it so far. And then for the finer detail of the GPS tracks, again, everything as expected, where it's laying down some nice solid tracks. Curves and corners are pretty crispy, and there's no misses or anything like that. And again, I'll have a lot more detail in my final in-depth review that'll be dropping in a few weeks. And then when it comes to heart rate accuracy, again, it's a good performer for the most part. I did have this little blip right here on this ride, and then it had a couple little fumbles on this ride here, but all in all, these are momentary, and the overall heart rate performance is really solid. Now, what's interesting to note here is that on this ride, I was also wearing the Series 10 on my other wrist, and this is what I've kind of seen from the last couple of years of testing both their Series line of watches versus their Ultras, where both have the same heart rate sensor, which is a good sensor, but the Ultras have a slight disadvantage being larger and heavier. So larger and heavier watches tend to bounce and move around on the wrist a little bit more than their smaller counterparts, which can lead to inaccuracies because these sensors don't really want to move around. And that's what I've not only seen on the Ultra versus their Series line of watches, but also other companies as well. Again, something like Garmin, where their smaller watches tend to do better than the larger ones. So that's the Ultra 2 Black, as well as a rundown of some of the new things that came out since the original Ultra 2 was released last year. But now let's talk about if you should upgrade. And quite frankly, if you already have an Ultra 2, it just comes down to the fact if you want that new color bad enough to sell your old watch and plunk down a few extra bucks. That's really it, because the original Ultra 2 comes with all the same features. Now, if you have an Ultra 1 though, that's where it's probably a little bit easier to justify upgrading to the Ultra 2 Black if you want this new colorway. Plus, you do get some updates like being able to use the double tap feature during workouts. And then lastly, let's also talk about why we didn't see an Ultra 3 this year, and I think that mainly has to do with the fact that Apple probably put most of its resources into the Series 10 with its redesign and upgrades, not to mention probably a bit of work on their new sleep apnea tracking feature. And we've seen in recent years from tons of different technology companies that we're not necessarily getting completely new devices every year. Sometimes it's every other year, and sometimes it's a little bit longer. Like Samsung, they had their Watch 5 Pro, then they skipped doing a Watch 6 Pro, and then they came out with their version of the Ultra. You could even say the same for Garmin, where they have their Phoenixes, which sometimes get new names like their new Phoenix 8, but sometimes each year's upgrades just justify like a little Pro upgrade being added on to the end. So as much as I would love to see an Ultra 3 this year just as much as you, I don't necessarily think they're expecting us to upgrade our watch every single year, and I think this is really backed up by the fact that they continually add new features to their Apple Watch OS that are still supported by previous generation Apple Watches. But still, kind of putting all that aside, if you do have the funds for the Ultra 2 Black and you really want it bad enough, I mean, it is pretty hot. Anyhow, if you found the information in this video to be useful, do me a quick favor and just hit that like button down below, and also subscribe to the channel for my in-depth review of the Series 10, which will be dropping right after this, as well as my long-term look of the Ultra 2 Black, which will be dropping in like a month or so. In the meantime, go have fun out there, and we will see you in the next video.